Hey folks, Dr. Mark here and back by popular demand. I am talking with Dr. Matt Alvord, and we're going to go over all things chiropractic as we do, and we hope that you enjoy our conversation today. And we do these things massively spontaneous. We might have a topic and we might not, but it's always about chiropractic. Dr. Matt, how's your day going, buddy?
Good. How about for you?
It's going great. It's going great. You know, I made a post the other day, and sometimes I can be a bit polarizing, where I said chiropractic does not need validation. Would you like to go into that just a little bit?
Well, I think sometimes the post can be short enough where there's room for interpretation, and then
Yes,
people head in whatever direction they want with that. Um,
absolutely.
I think everything on some level, unless it's truly a belief system, requires validation. Even something logical requires validation because we don't just believe in gravity, right? We validate that. Newton validated that, right? So, on a certain level, I think it's essential, but there's certain things we can't validate because when we start with the philosophy, we might have a logic or whatever, a position we start from, but some of those things are not, can't be confirmed, you know?
Yeah, that's 100%. So my point in making that post is because validation, words can have many different meanings and words evolve as, different generations happen. By validation, where I'm coming from is that chiropractors seem so desperate to try to pick up any crumbs possible to validate what they do to society. And that desperation and that image that chiropractic creates, that we just are just happy if anybody even talks to us, that it's detrimental in building an office.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah, go ahead.
no, no, yeah, I was even filming a podcast last night at Premium Production Studios, and this is a fellow that's been filming me and filming all the NTSC Institute videos, and he finally got it. He's like, "Hey, why don't we make some testimonials of people feeling better and doing better?" It's like, no, that crosses the line. We can make testimonials about people who love coming in the office, love the convenience, love the congruency, love the certainty, love the environment. And all those things are absolutely true. But once we try to say, oh, yeah, I can jump higher or run faster, now it's a treatment for that. So he's like, I think I get it now. And like, this is why it's such a challenge to sell. And I think so many times chiropractors are jumping at crumbs, whether it's especially from the medical profession. Oh, we just want to be accepted. And I remember seeing chiropractic displayed on TV shows like Martin, and Martin's girlfriend in the TV show was a chiropractor, which I thought was pretty cool. And when I see validation, I don't I I don't care if chiropractic is published, if a research article is published in a medical journal. I don't need acceptance for anybody because, as you know, chiropractic is a logical, deductive truth. And it's the chiropractor that must have that certainty in bringing it to the world. Whether people accept or reject the truth, that's out of our hands. Presenting the truth, communicating it, and creating value, now those are skill sets that we can develop and we are absolutely responsible for.
So I'd say validation is essential, but the problem is when people try to validate the wrong things. So it's absolutely essential to validate that you actually have a subluxation, and it's absolutely essential that you validate that you have adjusted that or restoration has taken place. That's essential of validation in chiropractic as I see it. Now, to your point, when you go start down this road and trying to anticipate and trying to see the effects in individuals, it opens up a door that I don't necessarily disagree with. The problem I have is that what they call chiropractic research is just spinal manipulation. And so even if they wanted to see a correlation, okay, even if they wanted to see a correlation, what they're doing is they're manipulating L5 to see what that does, or they're manipulating what happens when we manipulate C2. And the consideration isn't whether that system has interference to itself or whether it's expressing itself through restoration again. It's all about what happens when we press this button. Do we have this disease go away? That's how, like I say, I call that the philosophy of this for that.
And I get that. And I've never heard the term validation used in analysis of chiropractic. I've heard analysis and the certainty that a vertebral subluxation has been adjusted. But once again, words can have many different meanings, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's weak. I would never use the term validation because it implies you're trying to come to some acceptance. We are not here for acceptance. We are here to be speakers of the truth and provide a service based on certainty. And anytime you have a logic that doesn't take into consideration that we don't know innate normal, your research is flawed. And every research is flawed that doesn't take into consideration the vertebral subluxation. So I'm not saying that there isn't some benefit from inductive research. What I'm saying is when you don't take into consideration that we don't know innate normal and you're basing things on averages and you're not taking into consideration the 33 principles of chiropractic, then it's flawed. And now we're in medical research. And there's so many valid, amazing, brilliant minds, whether it's Monique Andrews or Robert Leach or Matt McCoy, that if I even question it to this point, well, and I get the argument, well, you're not doing anything. Well, I am. I'm doing things that I can have a massive impact on. And it's not like saying, oh, I need the research, but I see the benefit. If we're not taking into consideration innate normal, it's not going to be valid. And so what if it gets published in a medical journal? I think chiropractors should stand on their legs and have the credibility of chiropractic journals. And who cares? Because medicine's more popular, who cares? It doesn't make it right. What it makes is chiropractors seeking validation that implies weakness.
Yeah, the pivot point for me is we do need to validate the subluxation, that it actually happened, because Mark, as you know, if you asked most chiropractors if they adjusted somebody, if you were to actually do your own assessment, you'd find out they're still subluxated.
Possibly so,
God's
Matt.
honest truth. That's just the God's honest truth. And
Do you
then
have any
a lot of
research to
times,
support
I always say, a good assessment, if you can walk up to somebody who feels absolutely fantastic and find subluxations and be able to clear them, that's the chiropractic relationship. Conversely, if you have somebody who feels horrible, go ahead and decide whatever that is. They've got an illness or whatever, and you check them and they do not have a subluxation, there's nothing to do. Right? So it's really about just my brain was going in a different direction there, but keying off of, are they subluxated? Are they not subluxated? But most chiropractors are doing spinal manipulation even when they call it an adjustment. And their notion of a subluxation is a misalignment or a fixation or both. So that really muddies the waters anyway, because again, if you poll the average chiropractors without prompting them, most chiropractors will say they adjust. And we actually use those statistics in our profession. Well, most chiropractors believe in the subluxation, but if you were being intellectually honest, most of those who accept the subluxation are accepting a medical consideration of a medical subluxation anyway.
Yes.
So that gets lost. And then that's where I see the key for validating, okay, what is an actual subluxation that's measurable? And what does the adjustment do to validate that you've actually cleared the subluxation that was found?
I think that's valid. I would question the term measurable, and I would say observable by some means.
We have to measure.
Well, we don't know innate normal. There's no measurement. It's simply, is it there or is it not? It's an absolute. We don't know innate normal. But going back to what you said as well,
yeah,
Matt, I think part of it, because we could talk, and we have talked for hours well into the evening throughout the past 30-something years that we've known each other. When chiropractors try to incorporate so many things, we get what you're talking about. A lack of understanding of the basic science of chiropractic, the philosophy of chiropractic, and the applied science of it in practice, and the congruency thereof. So now validation, and even starting with B.J. Palmer, in the 1935 to 51 research clinic, he wanted to validate chiropractic through medical means, and it's not going to happen. And then he's trying to discredit all this PT and everything else. It's none of our business. And I'm not faulting him. I'm just simply saying it could have been done better based on the observation and knowledge we have now.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. But really, even though you say something's not measurable, no, you can't measure innate intelligence, but you can measure the effects in the body. And so ultimately, when you walk up to somebody to assess them, you're making an observation. That observation is a form of measurement on some capacity, because that's the same metric that you will use to decide that you're no longer supposed to be interacting with them because their system's working without interference. So we might be kind of passing each other with the languaging here, but there has to be some kind of measurement made. Now, I'm not talking about with a slide rule or anything, or even a nerve scope or whatever you want to do with that. But there has to be some green light that's given to the chiropractor to interact with that innate intelligence on the table and introduce an external resource to be used by that internal source. Okay, that there's a decision that has to be made, what direction or what location, what direction, and the nature of that force, and then to show that's no longer required because the impetus to do that is gone. There has to be some metric, call it what you want. It can be called unorthodox. We may not measure the same thing that medical doctors do, but we have our own metric. We have to have a way of assessing. That assessment is based off some contrast between an expressed state and an interfered state. So that is a form of measurement. Like, again, we might be just speaking past each other with some of the words here, but
There's just that one word. I agree with everything you're saying, and you're absolutely right. The only word that I have issue I have is the word measurement, because it implies some quantitative number or measurement, how they measure the mental impulse. I'm talking, and like we would say innate impulse now, but mental impulse was measured in phorons. And
yeah,
it's a totally abstract thing. So it's like,
yeah,
it's not a measurement at all. It's like totally an abstract. Is a phoron the amount of information going to the target, not cells or tissue of, I mean, and it's so abstract. So
yeah.
there is no question that you're right.
So that languaging, as far as I understand, was literally created as a placeholder for
Okay.
concepts to broach two different places from A to B, knowing that there had to be a way to get from A to B or from B to A. So in my brain, I'm kind of a mathematical guy. So imaginary numbers, you know what imaginary numbers are? The
I
square
mean,
root of a negative number.
okay.
Well, it technically doesn't exist, but they
Right.
need it because there's certain times in the mathematical formulas where that is necessary to get to the next place that is a real number.
Okay.
That makes sense. So
Yes.
you were talking about a little bit. You want to talk about cycles today. One of the aspects of cycles, which I kind of wince a little bit at, is there's this. It's almost like this arbitrary list of steps, and I know they're not arbitrary. I know they're well thought out. There's going to have the real technical guys going, wait a minute, wait a minute. They're all there. They're all supposed to be there, but at the same time, they're educated constructs. I look at them like
Correct.
ladders. Like if we're supposed to get to the roof of a house and that there's a ladder there. We could argue how many rungs need to be on that ladder. We know they all need to get to the roof, but
Yes.
really there are these arbitrary things to create these mental constructs so that you can get there. The important thing is you know
Absolutely.
that you get there. The rest of it is an educated consideration.
I'm totally down with that, and that's one of the biggest reasons why Reggie didn't write a lot, because he's like this, like about trophic impulses. Which, please, Reggie, I wish you would have wrote about that at all. But he was like, look, if I write this now, it's going to be proven wrong later, and that was his biggest reason, from what I'm told, that he didn't write a lot. And I'm like, no, and I respect BJ's courage for writing things that he obviously changed his mind many times throughout his career. And going back to what you said about analysis, Jim Healy, another brilliant philosopher in chiropractic, has a timeless article essay that he wrote, and I think it's on the Chiropractic Trust Facebook page, the group, Analytical Certainty. And he runs analysis through the basic science of chiropractic and the philosophy of chiropractic. And I just think that it is I please read it and we can discuss it. It's one of his most brilliant pieces of work. But there's a couple things I want to read to you, because I love your thesis on restoration, and I love Reggie's thesis on the triune of life. And I love what Claude Lessard is doing. Now, Claude Lessard, and I encourage you, even if you start with his breakdown of R.W. Stevenson's chiropractic test book, he's breaking down this is volume 1. And keep in mind, he's re-editing and correcting as he goes on. Now, within the chiropractic principles of the 33 principles, what Claude does that you may find interesting, because it somewhat correlates with what you're doing with restoration. In number 30, the cause of disease, I do not like that term. They could have used a bunch of different terms. Why hyphen it that already exist? I digress. Principle number 31, as Claude Lessard modified it, the vertebral subluxation and its correction. And there's 2 parts. A, the vertebral subluxation is the uniquely chiropractic entity as a cause of interference to the transmission of conducted innate information force. He uses information and force interchangeably because force within innate law, and even in universal law to a different extent, has information attached. And B, the correction of vertebral subluxations is always due to the process of adapting information force by the innate law of living things. So this correlates powerfully without adding to the 33 principles, because they also have principle of coordination number 32. Brilliant. Thank you, R.W. Stevenson. And Claude just sort of updates them with modern terminology and knowledge. Give me your opinion of what I just read, and please, at least start with this one so we can have dialogue about that and maybe our own Oprah Winfrey book club. So what is your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot there. What particular aspect do you want me to address? You just read a lot of stuff.
It is a lot of stuff. It is a lot of stuff, Matt. And that's why we talk about these things in never-ending conversation. So,
yeah. So you had touched on one thing about talking about how energy and matter are interchangeable. They're just in different forms, which I totally agree with. In fact, I would actually extrapolate that into, or at least correlate it with energy is function and matter is structure. So it's really the same thing. It's just encapsulated or not, or it's in certain forms of organization or not. So yeah, I totally agree with that. As far as the changing the language, that's interesting. That's fine. I would still go back and have a controlled fire on the actual principles the way they're laid out anyway, because I think, and this is my opinion, there was an overemphasis on stressing the deductive nature of the philosophy because that's already built in, instead of making the principles follow the logic order of the way we see the philosophy. So there's this framework where we start with universal, and then we move to innate, and then the interference to the innate, and then the restoration of that through the adjustment. I think that's the path we should have gone. I love Reggie's letter N. I think that's key. As far as BJ had that chart or that formula he had. He said it was the most powerful thing he'd ever seen. I think the most powerful thing was Reggie's letter N. That whole notion right there. I think if the principles actually followed that thought process of initiation through the initiation of creation from intelligence to matter, the expression of that in the living body, then interference to that, and then restoration, that's how those principles would have been a lot more powerful in that order, regardless of the languaging that was used within them.
And that's an interesting point. I believe Reggie called that N the chemistry of life. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I don't even necessarily like that that name, even though it might be a great way to bridge the average person sitting in a chair who's considering, starting care. Because it is inquisitive language. What does that actually mean, right?
Right, exactly. And that's the whole thing. When people say about the term, I know you've mentioned it, Eric Sealer's mentioned it. Oh, NTC, it doesn't mean a whole lot. You have to explain it. No matter what, you have to explain it. No matter what model of chiropractic you're in, you could be the most medical chiropractor in the world. You still got to explain something. I mean, my goodness. Yeah. So, Matt,
something different than what they're already thinking.
100%. Come on. I mean, if I go see a physical therapist, I want to be educated before I get rolling. And, sometimes, and I've seen different orthopedics because I like to push my body, I guess. And
Mark, real quick, it's funny. You just remind me of, the average chiropractor who's steeped in this medical model of basically just I'm going to can't use the word adjusting, but manipulating fixations. Really, again, they're not going to use that language. But in that thing, when they set people down to explain how they work in their office, about how they're going to work with their L5 and their whatever, that person arguably leaving that office that first visit is not thinking one idea different than they walked in.
What's not? They're thinking
What
what's
I did, nothing's changed in their head at all. Same
yes,
paradigm,
Matt.
exact same paradigm as taking a pill.
Because Matt, it's already socially acceptable. And chiropractors, going back to my post, I'm going to try not to strain my arm, pat myself in the back. It's seeking validation. Oh, they just accepted it. Great. They're going to start. They like me because I told them what they wanted to hear. And that is very frustrating. Nothing has changed, because if you're going to help people change, you have to be willing to be rejected. You have to be willing to be rejected for the truth, and that's okay. So going back to what you say, like there's so much, I get what you're saying, Matt, especially when it's specific to chiropractic. I just got to say that I love that the 33 principles start with the universal of the 19 principles, and then the next 10 being innate principles and 4 being chiropractic. I still think that it was in that right order, and Stevenson is so far ahead of its time. I'm not going to argue with what you're saying from a chiropractic perspective. One of the things that we have as a luxury, DD and BJ had to figure things out as they went. So they practiced for many years without there being a construct of the 33 principles. Now we have these principles to run everything through, and we have the luxury of building a profession congruent with this basic science. And I think it has to start universally and then work its way down to chiropractic. And that's my opinion, not to take anything away from what you said.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't take away from the whole deductive logic or anything. But I think in doing that, it wraps us up and it pulls us away from the actual objective of what we're trying to do. There's just so much there. My brain got going in so many different directions again. But yeah, it's crazy. Like it's just like a fireworks display. But one of the things I talked about in my paper was a syllogism. Do you know what a syllogism is? Yeah. So this is why
syllogism is bringing something in relation to something else and how to explain it. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a basic idea that if you have a general concept or a general principle or observation, and then you've got an exception to that, and then as a conclusion, you can draw from that exception from the general. It's a deductive kind of mentality. That's not exactly what it is, but the basic structure is you start with, if you look up a syllogism, like in true general philosophy, it starts out with a major premise. Sound familiar? That's not a new concept to chiropractic. It starts with a major premise. What's that? Yeah,
it's absolutely not
major
unique to
premise.
chiropractic. Yeah.
And then the second part is a minor premise, and the second part is a conclusion. So that's why I called my my thesis the minor premise, because we start with this major premise, but until we hone it down through deductive means, we can't get to the final conclusion of our philosophy, which is ultimately restoration of this thing that we identify as an exception, which is the subluxation to that major premise. Because the major premise is all about expression. It's all about identity of source and where everything comes from as a one-way street of that expression coming out. And then the minor premise comes off of this subluxation idea, but ultimately, if there's no restoration, there's no completion of that syllogism in chiropractic. So in a certain sense, philosophically, an argument can be made that if you look at just the listed of 33 principles, it is an incomplete philosophy at that point. Because as I like to say, you basically say, you're alive, you subluxate, and then you die. actually wrote that in my paper, because if you follow the experience of those 33 listed principles, after you're subluxated, again, you talk about bankers and clerks, and the guy's still subluxated. Now he's in a bank.
Still subluxated. And now and I don't like in Claude's work, and he is modifying these. So in principle number 31, the vertebral subluxation he includes and its correction. I don't like the term correction because it should be adjustment. And in Article B, he states, and the correction of vertebral subluxations is always due to a process of adapting information forced by the innate law of living things. Does that is that enough, or does there need to be more there? I know you wrote a whole paper on this. Is that enough to modify?
I mean, there's a bunch there,
But
just the word correction. I don't have a problem with the word correction unless we emphasize what is doing the correcting. Just like some of the languaging is really good in Stevenson's, where he talks in his bold print, and I think it's italicized. He says the aim of the chiropractor is, remember it, restoration. So the aim is restoration, but it doesn't mean the chiropractor does the restoring. The chiropractor introduces a resource to the body that should lead to restoration, but the innate intelligence does the restoring. The innate intelligence does everything.
And Stevenson was so brilliant, so far ahead of his time. Dare I say, of that whole era, he was the greatest philosopher, truly putting things together. Did you say that Stevenson was an engineer? Is that correct?
And from my understanding, he was an attorney.
An attorney. Ooh.
Yeah. So
and Dawson Evans was the engineer.
Yeah, that could be, sure. That would be great too, because you got somebody really crossing T's and dotting I's in that particular endeavor.
Right.
So if you want somebody making an instrument, he'd be your guy.
He'd be your guy. That's right. Yeah. And what was J. Clay Thompson before he was a chiropractor?
I don't know. We'd have to ask Beth, because his granddaughter Beth, she's actually.
I should ask him. You met him, right? Because he was at our school when we were there.
I don't think I ever met him. I think I remember him coming through. As you know, back in the day, even at Palmer in the early 90s, a lot of these guys, we were warned not to necessarily go see.
I know, that's crazy, dude.
I mean, I think when you and I were at Palmer, I don't think Reggie was allowed, and I don't think at that point Sigafus was allowed. I think I saw Sigafus at Palmer like after I graduated.
I was in my first trimester. Reggie spoke at Lyceum, which was homecoming then, and that was his first time back on campus since before he started spinology. So
yeah,
I'm not saying he didn't get kicked off campus later on, but I saw him a couple times. Of course, as you recall, I was a big follower of Michael Kale, very dogmatic. Yeah, very dogmatic.
What's great about your energy is that no matter what Mark Romano was doing, he was all in on that. But to your credit too, when you found out a better way to think and do things, you pivoted on the spot.
Yes.
And then you were 100% in that. And then so that was just really cool. Quick story about Sigafus is that my mom worked for chiropractor for 37 years.
Yeah, and that's awesome.
He was a Palmer grad. And so he took me to Palmer in the early 80s when I was pretty young. Now, here's the wild part about Sigafus. So we show up there, it's homecoming, right? And we're in the Great Hall, right? And you got those stairs that go up into the Great Hall. And it's got like this kind of cool, majestic feel about the thing, right? Anyway, but we go to that place, and we weren't late, but we were like on time. But in order to see him, it was packed. The entire place was packed. People were lying down the stairs in an open door just to hear him in the hallway. Okay.
Wow.
So it was packed. So first of all, we get there, it's packed. We can't get in the room. But we can see. I mean, they got the doors open and everything, right? Okay, so this is the early 80s, and Sigafus was there. By the time I went to school there in the early 90s with you, he had been banned by then. So for something happened in that time frame where he was allowed on campus. But here, real quick on this. So here's this young guy that's greener than green, thinking about going to chiropractic school, and with my field doc, and we're waiting for him to show up, almost just like waiting for like Aerosmith to show up, right?
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden he comes around the corner with the whole freaking entourage. There's like 8 of them following him. right? Kind of probably like people followed Sid, right?
Yes.
Anyways, so here comes Sigafoos. Sigafoos comes in. He's got, I kid you not, he had a huge brim straw hat on
Yes.
and
I
a
saw
big
that hat.
button that
Yes.
said chiropractor. And he comes
It's a
sauntering
what
in,
now?
and that was the
It's,
first time I ever saw him, much less heard him. And then by the time we were in school, he wasn't allowed on campus.
a name like Zigafus, you're destined to be a chiropractor. This is a national grad that was doing colonics in his practice. And I think he was a big DE guy. And him and Reggie were very good friends. And Zigafus was this upper cervical guy, practiced in a big old church and would do all testimonials, chiropractic, getting sick people well. Him and Reggie were never on the same page. And I never understood why they were such close friends. But the thing I love the most about Zigafus is he wanted to shout chiropractic from a soapbox on every single street corner in every single town in the United States. And I love that about him. I just love it.
Yeah, whether or not you thought, because you could always pull, nitpick different things with whatever,
Of
but
course.
it
Of
would,
course.
he was, what good word for Sigafoos, I think, was undeniable.
No doubt.
He
100%.
was
Big DE.
undeniable.
I'm a big DE guy.
Even
Beloved.
if you didn't like him, you were never going to forget him.
Same thing with Sid Williams. Same thing
Yeah,
with Sid.
yeah.
I I can listen to one Sid message and be like, that's unbelievable. And then I can listen to another one. It's like I was listening to one the other day where he's saying 95% of all ailments within the human being is between the articulation of the occipital condyles, atlas, and axis. 95%. You adjust that. I'm like, if that's the case, why is there any disease, man? Come on. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yet he could say something. It was like Barge. Barge could say something. I'm like, are you serious? And then he'd come back with something else. Well, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Were
Matt,
you ever were you ever adjusted by Barge?
I never was. I seen
Oh
videos
man.
on it.
Well, were you ever adjusted by Pierce?
No, I went to some of the Pierce.
Remember little Pierce from South
Yeah,
Carolina?
Vern Pierce. Yes, and
Vern
people
Pierce,
every
man.
time he'd come in, people would say C5, C5. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, he'd always say, that real cranky voice, he'd go, dead at 40, buried at 80.
yeah, that's right. Yes, and I enjoyed him. And once again, Michael Kale did not like anybody. It seems
Yeah, I
because
picked that up about him. And I tell you what, that's one reason why I didn't spend much time investigating Kale, because it's really hard to resonate with something when you don't feel good about its leader.
bro, 100%. Now, let me tell you, he was captivating like a Southern Baptist preacher. He'd hold up the Bible and volume 18 right next to it. He would draw you in. Was not a philosopher, but definitely an outstanding technician. Everything was based on volume 18.
But he always
And
walked around with a green book, but he wasn't philosophical.
no, well, there was only one green book. He read it like
Yeah,
87 times. It was
yeah,
volume 18. And
yeah.
so the dogma is something that was just, and even now when we have these conversations, people will, especially if it's Kale or some kind of upper cervical, usually there's a lot of emotional attachment, getting sick people well, or a family member that overcame something. And I'm like, that's great. You can't predict it, but that's wonderful that happened. And then if I don't give in to say that, yes, chiropractic should go in that direction completely, then it
I
is
think
what it is.
Yeah, I think it's a really natural thing, though, that
It
whatever
is.
technique opens you up is the technique you end up practicing. You can't just run around condemning every technique, though,
No, no, definitely.
unless it's not a chiropractic technique. So,
Right. And how do we know that?
and how do we know? But here's the thing, and this is full circle now. That's why at
Yes.
some point we are measuring from something we can validate to say, is it subluxated? Is it not? You can choose what that is as far as what's acceptable or not in chiropractic criteria. But we are still making an observation, and that observation is no longer there after we adjust them. That
Yes.
contrast, that's a metric. That's a metric. However way you want to describe that. Now, again, it's not necessarily the traditional ways that they measure stuff, like checking the blood pressure or something.
That's why we need to change the terminology from stuff like, let's learn from our past. Trying to reuse words is not working. And to your credit, Matt, when you said to me a few months ago, chiropractic is inherently non-therapeutic. At first I said, no, it's not, no. And I was wrong. And I had to think about that. And yesterday I was talking with Claude Lessard, who I love to talk to, and we go back and forth and have our one like you and I do. And I love talking with brilliant people. And Claude says to me, because he knows I'm the chairman of the Chiropractic Trust, and I, talk NTC all the time. And he says to me, the problem that I have with NTC, Mark, is that it makes it appear that there is an option, that there is an alternative to the 33 principles, and that is wrong. It's either congruent with the 33 principles and it's chiropractic, or it's not chiropractic and you're in a different profession. And
Yeah.
I said, okay, Claude, the only defense I have with that is one, you're absolutely right. But first, chiropractic started as a therapy, and there is justification to keep it a therapy, even though it's not congruent with the 33 principles. Thank you, R.W. Stevenson, for having the courage to write them. Unbelievable. Imagine if he didn't have the courage to write them. My goodness. I said the only reason why we need to keep it is because there are two models of chiropractic, and that's justified through tradition and not through logic. But in the end, he's right and you're right. There is only one chiropractic, and it must be congruent. And I said, Claude, I don't know why you're allowed on any campus at any school, because now we have a measuring stick to measure everything chiropractic against the 33 principles that you're promoting and clarifying. And I'm surprised you're not an outcast. You know what I'm saying? Because of that.
Yeah.
Because now you just can't just say anything's chiropractic. I just want to use different words, Matt. That's all. Because I don't want to imply we're having a quantitative number. Everything you say, I agree with. If we can just tweak the words to make it more uniquely chiropractic in its description.
Another way I like to say it is that chiropractic is a non-dualistic philosophy. So
I
it's
love
not,
that.
it's not, and this comes from general philosophical concepts, but it's not chocolate or vanilla. It's chocolate or not chocolate.
Correct. Yes. And
That's a
that was my
non-dualistic philosophy. Yeah.
Matt, and that was my non-therapeutic versus therapeutic, because it's either one or the other. But once again, everything 100%. The areas that we disagree with is going to be terminology and the correlation in regards to symptomatology. So I'd like to go into a deep debate on that at some point, not
Yeah.
today. But I think that we need to focus on our vernaculum, because we can explain every bit of it, because the chiropractic fits into no other box, no other system. There's nothing like it, separate and distinct. BJ was brilliant in saying that. And I think that was one of the most invaluable contributions that BJ had to the profession.
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of the problem is that the principles that we have laid out right now are so well laid out. There's a kind of a apathy to want to make them better, and they can absolutely be made better. Because if we talk about how brilliant they were and how these principles, see, what's interesting is the principles themselves are perfect, but the languaging behind them is not necessarily so.
100%. Yes. And the principles don't change. It's our understanding. So, yes, words are clumsy. I know when I put words
Yeah.
out there, there can be many different definitions, but it stimulates conversation that's so necessary. I want chiropractic to stand on its own legs and say, we are separate, distinct, and unique. Here it is, world, and we can help everybody on this planet live closer to their full potential. Either you want it or you don't. But either way, you're paying for it, because there's no way around vertebral subluxations. Yes.
So I think part of the thing with the name too, and non-therapeutic, the problem that I see with that, unfortunately, is because the word chiropractic has been stolen. So unfortunately, the people left who didn't leave the philosophy the way it truly is, they're left to come up with another name relative to the thing they stole. You know what I mean? So all of a sudden now we're talking in terms of not the thing that was stolen, and that there's that negative definition thing again. So there's got to be a way to come up with something where maybe this is the way out. maybe we just start talking about chiropractic, but the language that we're using with is so foreign to people that they have no choice but to initiate a conversation because it's clearly not the chiropractor they're talking. So we either have to come up with a completely different word or steal the original word back.
Well, I can see that. And you watched dinosaurs as a kid. Remember the little dinosaur baby? And every time the daddy would be so excited that the baby was going to say "dada," and the baby be going "da, da," and the dad's like, "Yeah, da, not the mama." Yeah. So that was his name. He was not the mama. Um, you could argue that chiropractic was stolen from the beginning, which Reggie would argue to say that, look,
Yeah, that's
chiropractic
true.
was, yeah,
Yeah.
that they didn't understand what they had, Matt. And now that we do understand, we are in a bit of a pickle. Reggie, to his credit, tried
Yeah.
to do it through spinology. He tried to do it through spinology to say, okay, here's our big start over. And even that got corrupted. I
Most
think
of them
Anthony,
became therapists.
yes,
Not even
yes,
some of them, most of them.
most of them, yes, because they didn't get it. When Reggie was asked how many people truly get the big idea of how you're trying to enlighten people to chiropractic, he said maybe 12 chiropractors on the planet. Anthony Tremaine in Australia changed the name to neurospinology. And Matt, I would love for us to get a conversation with him. He makes such a compelling argument. I think he's going somewhere pretty amazing. And I think that would be an amazing conversation. But people argue, Eric Saylor will argue, you're changing the language. Well, no, we're improving it. It didn't arrive in 1910. DD or BJ they didn't own chiropractic. So even then, Matt, it's like, how do we resolve the pickle that we're in because we have two different professions under one name?
Yeah.
And how do we
However way
resolve
we
that?
go forward, we have to make sure that if we're truly accepting that chiropractic was there from the beginning, even though there
Okay.
were more barnacles than boat there, if we're going to accept that the principles were there from the beginning, our only way forward that makes sense without becoming something else is refining versus evolving. Because evolving is to become something else.
Yeah.
Refining means you're in the process of removing barnacles. You're not trying to jump into a different boat.
But don't you think that is an evolutionary process because you're getting better, more clear, you're improving in some way?
Well, it depends what you call that because if you've accepted this boat is the only place where chiropractic is, your only options are to clean up the hull of that boat or to jump in a different boat. Evolving would mean to jump into a different boat or a bigger boat or a shinier boat or whatever, but one that might have, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, because as soon as you do that, you're actually into a different philosophy. That's the problem I have. At some point, the philosophy has changed because, they say, and then again, this is not an expose on like evolution or anything, but if you're going to say that you've got an ape and then you've got a man, let's say that actually happens. An ape is not a man. Do
That's
you know what I mean?
correct. I
Yeah,
do, but I don't.
so if we were to evolve, truly evolve, we would be literally starting a different philosophy that looked very so much like our other philosophy that it's just easier to refine it. You can't, but I don't want to get into the process of alchemy, which means trying to change gold
Make
into
something.
another alloy. I want to
Yeah,
clean
or
up
vice
what's there
versa.
and make it 24 karat gold. Because if Didi really found that gold nugget in the mine, okay, we don't want to evolve it. We don't want to turn it into another element. We like gold. Gold is our deal. But we have to clean it up. We have to put it in the crucible. We have to burn away the impurities. And to me, that's not a process of evolving. That would be alchemy. That would be alchemy in that example.
See, I would disagree with that. I think evolution got a very bad rap from the theories from
Yeah.
Darwinian,
Yeah.
because I think humans evolve. We get better, we get stronger, or we don't exist anymore. We adapt. But
Yeah.
I get the premise of what you're saying. So when I say evolve, I'm saying get better, get clearer, more succinct, get smarter, but not abandon it to change it. And Reggie,
But
when
that
he
would be
fought,
refining. Mark Romano getting better at jujitsu is him refining his technique, not becoming an MMA guy who's currently, fighting for the title. That's a different guy. That's not Mark Romano anymore.
But see, I don't think I think Darwinian used the word, but it's not in the like if we study evolutionary biology or evolutionary psychology, it's the thinking and the biology that has changed within humans, making humans stronger and better. So, like for example, 2 years ago, Dr. Mo was presenting a wonderful lecture at Sherman Lyceum, and she was using evolutionary biology when she was talking about the vagus nerve, that the vagus nerve has a ventral and dorsal branch, that the dorsal branch is the fight or flight, constantly ready to rumble or run for sheer survival. Tied into the lizard brain and such, and then what they call the second brain in the gut area. Very brilliant. And what she was saying, as humans evolved, then you had, and I don't know how they know this, a ventral branch that was more for the peaceful times, because as we grew, we didn't have to worry about the saber-toothed tiger or poisonous snakes or where we're going to have our shelter or invasion from another tribe, as much as it was more consistent 1,000 years ago. So that they were estimating was a relatively new evolution that happened slowly in human development. So I don't think you have to change a species to say that we're evolving or change the philosophy or a profession, because where you and I agree, even though we may struggle with our terminology that we share, is we don't want to leave chiropractic. People say, well, why don't you just become a spinologist? Simple. I don't want to. I love chiropractic. I love the history of chiropractic. I love how we got to this point. I would say how we evolved to this point, and you may disagree with that. And to me, it's not a hill I want to die on, but the fact that we understand more of where we're at now and the history and the matriarchs and patriarchs that got us here is just quite unbelievable. And now here we are studying what was written in 1910, 1927, 1935, and trying to make it better. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I guess for me it comes back to the principles. So if our principles are valid, they don't need to be added to. They just need to be refined. So language changes for me are tolerable for the right direction for that refinement.
Mm-hmm.
But to actually add different principles or something else to it, or to get rid of certain principles, would actually be changing the philosophy. Now, I'm a very simple guy. I like the idea that simple is best. Um,
Yeah.
to me, I always have my own way of describing things, but to me, the periodic table of chiropractic, okay, is intelligence, force, and matter. So whatever principles describe that relationship, that's great. We can just decide which ones do that best. For example, I was thinking just a little bit earlier, the principle 17, for every cause
Cause
is
and
an
effect.
effect, for every effect is an cause, right?
Yeah. Right.
Um, technically, that isn't a chiropractic principle. It's just an observation about everything. There's nothing that lists that. There's
It's
nothing
a
that,
universal.
yeah.
Yes.
So it's like well, that's really almost like just a sidebar of just talking about the logic of how everything's connected. But it really doesn't describe anything uniquely to chiropractic. So,
No.
you know what I mean?
It's
Like,
part of the universal. That's you, because remember the first 19 are universal principles. The whole every science in the world, and I was trying to explain this to Dr. Robert Leach. Every science in the world can agree to the major premise that there is a universal principle of organization in all matter, continually giving it its property and actions, thus maintaining it in existence. And he's like, yeah. So yeah, no doubt. And it's still, I think it still needs to be mentioned, because even like in the in when he talks about the signs of life, which is another brilliant thing. There are times, and many times, that we can't prove something exists. We can only validate it through observing what it does, and saying that we can't prove life, but we can observe the synergism based on the signs of life. Assimilation, excretion, adaptation, growth, and reproduction. These are signs that life exists. Brilliant, Matt. It's just brilliant that they did it like this. My goodness.
evidence is different than proof.
Yes.
If you have a
Yes.
crime scene, you have evidence, but you don't necessarily have unless you have a videotape of the guy stabbing the guy right there, you might find the knife, you might find blood, you might find the body or whatever. That's evidence. But of course, the whole idea with those crime juries is that they get to a point where it's basically irrefutable. But this is why, too, I like the analogy of this book I have is just sitting on this book I've got about, and to me, I'm calling it the river, and it's all about the river is the expression of the intelligence, and then the rock in the river is the subluxation, and then however way that intelligence has to adapt around that rock creates turbulence. So as far as what's measurable or not, to me, the matter are these water molecules passing through from the energy of the innate intelligence that allows it to flow. Okay, that's life. As soon as they stop moving, it's death. But you can't measure the rock because the rock is not water. But there's a difference between water that's moving gently from A to B because there's no interference versus the turbulence created by the rock. And there's a difference between that water flowing from A to B versus the white water that's created by the rock. So we can't measure the rock, but we can measure the effect on the water. So we can't, one thing I like to remind chiropractors is that we can't measure the absence of something. So technically you can never measure a subluxation exactly, but you can see the evidence of it in the body that forms a particular pattern or a particular observation that we can interact with. If we remove that rock from the river and the turbulence that we can measure is gone, we can deduce that interference is no longer there because that particular adaptation that's associated with the rock in the river is no longer there as well.
Yeah, the only word I change is measure. Because even Claude, when he talks about the vertebral subluxation interfering with innate impulses, which implies it's only on the efferent side, is that specific information needed at the receptor site at that specific moment in time is slowed down, and that adaptive coordinated process does not happen. And now we have the process of incoordination of total function. Very similar to what you're saying. The intelligence, that's the information within that force, is not getting to the receptor on time.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think of the concept of disafferentation?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Disafferentation?
Tell me what that means.
So disafferentation, well, afferentation is back to the brain, right? Everything coming into the brain. Did you say Lessard was saying that when the subluxation only affects the efferent or afferent side?
Only affects the efferent side. And Stevenson said that as well. Both said it for different reasons. Reggie, even in his thesis on the triune of life, said you can have interference to the afferent pathway. And I would agree with him right now. Claude said he and Reggie argued this till Reggie died. And Claude hasn't made enough of an argument for me to change my mind yet because of the different theories of how a vertebral subluxation. So in my understanding of the vertebral subluxation right now, I would say you can have interference to the afferent pathway being a limitation of matter.
I'm in a place where I think both of them are right. Because it's either where you're going to say how quickly you say it's going to affect the system. So you might make an argument that in the initial moment that the subluxation first occurs, what it might affect first, but it eventually has to affect both of them.
That would be my argument, Matt. But not
so close. I mean, you're really creating something that, I mean, we could spend more energy on things that would be more fruitful. It kind of reminds me of electricity. They could argue whether electricity goes through the wire or over the wire, but you're kind of going, the lights are coming on. You know what I mean?
Matt, I use that analogy all the time. We don't know how electricity works, but we know enough that we can harness it. We don't know how this body works, but as a chiropractor, we know enough to be able to analyze your spine, identify the vertebral subluxation, and what the innate law is trying to do, and make an educated force in that direction with the intent that it's transitioned to an innate force for an adjustment to occur, and then reanalyze that area, as you said, observing the changes that indicate a vertebral subluxation has been adjusted. 100%. We do not, and we will never know everything. We can know enough to harness it for good.
Did you know, like, for the first 100 years, they didn't know how aspirin worked? They didn't know the mechanism. They
That's
just knew that
amazing.
when people took it, they felt better.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and
It's
then wow, for
amazing.
like the first century. And then it's like, oh, we figured that out now.
Yeah,
We
as
know
far
what
as
the chemical process of that now.
they figured it out to the point that they can understand it. And how many times do we see in research? You see it like one decade eggs are bad, another decade eggs are good, another decade coffee's bad, another decade coffee's good. The
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
research, yeah.
yeah.
So
And you
yeah,
have to define what good means. That's their problem.
well, and that's it. Yeah, and that's a problem. And once again, when you're doing things inductively, you have to at least acknowledge the limitation and not ignore it. So I
Did
think
you ever
that's
hear the
part of it.
story, Mark, about the guy who went to the medical doctor? This is like in the last decade or two. Guy goes to the medical doctor. He's a physicist. Okay. Doctor says you
Yeah.
need to lose a bunch of weight. So he's like, yeah, you're right. I need to lose weight. So he's losing weight, but he happens to ask the medical doctor, where does the weight go when you lose it? So if I lose 40 pounds, where did that go? And the doctor says, I don't know. Let me see if I can find it. Turns out they didn't know. So this physicist went and figured out from a physics energy system point of view, if you have a system that weighs 200 pounds and now you do something to that system, exertion, whatever, altered caloric intake, whatever, energy intake, he's looking at it from a physics point of view. And now the system weighs 160 pounds. Where did the 40 pounds go from that system to the environment? How did it leave that system? Medical doctors didn't know. This guy figured it out. Do you know what happens to the vast majority of the weight people lose when they lose weight?
I would guess from what
I
I've been
wasn't sure
told.
either. I wasn't sure either.
My guess from what I've been told, because people have had this debate that do fat cells say as one of the do they just get smaller or do they actually multiply and then get die off and get removed in waste? I would say a lot of it gets removed into the waste systems of the lymphatic, urinary, and bowel tracts. What was the
So,
answer?
due to increased metabolism as a result of exertion or just the metabolism because I'm higher, maybe be eating better quality foods, all that stuff, the majority of that gets lost out through the chemical pathways that we end up breathing it out.
That's
We
amazing.
breathe it out. While we're losing weight, our breath becomes more acidic and we end up breathing out these metabolites as gas products. And of course, we have to do a lot of breathing to have that happen. But he found out as an energy system, that's where most of it comes out.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, but it just, I mean, you think of all these things, we're like, did we have to know that?
No, but
We
here,
just knew, yeah, if we did X, Y, or Z, we're going to lose weight.
Matt, 100%. And I've had this similar conversation with Jim Healy, where I will, for years, I would run things by Jim Healy. One of the things lately was interference to the afferent pathway. And his first question to me is, if you knew the answer, what would change? And my reply was, because our focus is so exclusive, it behooves us to have as much knowledge as possible and into even the theories of what's possible. Because, like you said, these are educated theories of what may be going on, but it makes us better chiropractors. And next time we will go into cycles, like understanding what's possible with us the cycle. And like you said, it doesn't have a beginning or an end. It simply is. We do that for our own benefit, but also to understand that this one cycle is not one cycle. It is compound cycles to an infinite number happening in an infinite amount of times during any specific time period, whether it be seconds or minutes. And we as chiropractors get to work with that, which that knowledge, those working principles, as BJ said, makes a better chiropractor because we're more confident on this massive impact that we're having on the world. And we wouldn't want to focus on doing anything else but helping people live better through this adjustment of vertebral subluxations. And I think that is what makes chiropractors unique and constantly improving.
Yeah. I had a guy come into the office one time and he's bragging about, these wearables that everybody has. They have stuff on their arms, measuring glucose and all this stuff, right?
Yeah,
What do
yeah.
you think of this new device? And I go, didn't you just buy one of those like last year? He goes, but this does even more. And I said, is that gonna reinforce all the changes you're not making anyway? Like, what's the point of measuring even more stuff because you're not changing anything anyway? But he
That's a good
loved the
point.
fact that he can measure more stuff, but he hasn't changed his lifestyle at all. Even
Yes,
when he
and
bought the old device the year before.
dude, that's hilarious. And there's so many lessons to be learned from that. That having all this access to information is wonderful, but if we're not using it, how is it useful in any way?
Yeah.
So, and
And one
this
of
is
the
like,
things you mentioned too, that even if we're going to, whatever steps we're going to have in cycles or whatever um, principles we're going to have, and the power there is the congruency. The power is that they all need to be working get together and actually defending each other as the bricks in the same house.
yes.
So congruency is huge.
It's massively huge. It's the only defense we have to the scope of practice and bringing it to the world. It's the only thing that makes chiropractic. And I find it interesting that you don't want to add to the principles, but yet your whole thesis was adding restoration to the principles,
Well,
which I think is
ironically, it wasn't adding to it. It was recognizing that they had not recognized it within the philosophy. Because again, he had a list of 33 principles, not the list, but a
that's right.
list of 33 principles. And then he proceeded in basically the rest of the book, constantly coming back to how important restoration was. But you're not
Yes,
listed in
absolutely.
the 33 you've listed back here. So
Do I?
meaning it's not about adding a principle. It was just saying you have not laid this one out that's already there.
Well, and I would call that an evolution in our thinking in logic, but improvement, not saying that we're trying to change it and become something else, but simply saying that we're improving our understanding because we know more. And yes, it was laid out. And hats off to Stevenson for what he did because there's no other green book like that. And yes, now we can have the privilege of standing on his shoulders and saying, look, you're saying this over and over again. Um, so why isn't it in there? Because you're constantly going back to it.
And
But
this is why, too,
brilliant.
I'm a big proponent for refinement versus evolution, because if you apply criticism and analysis and scrutiny to the philosophy, just like fire in a crucible, you don't get a different substance. You get less, and whatever's there is purer. It doesn't
Yeah,
turn into another substance. So
correct.
that's my positioning with all that. So
I want that. And I think simplicity is equivalent to genius. Einstein would say, and I agree, if you can't explain your ideas to a 5-year-old kid, you don't own them. You don't know
yeah,
them enough.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
So I think,
the idea of simple but no simpler. Yeah.
yeah, that
And
works because you don't want to leave out.
the process should be whatever we're going through and looking at, we're constantly looking for incongruency.
Yes,
And that should stand out. Anything should stand out in contrast to everything else that we've accepted. So anyway,
dude. No, and we're going to end on that powerful term because it's so vital. This is why we go back and look and we quit. Like I could see so many times in my practice during each day when I'm looking back, I could have said that better. That could be misleading. I got to work on my communication here. I got to work on my analysis there. I'm a little bit uncertain. So 100%. And
but
this is
Mark, I
where
will
we
say this last note in practice. Have you ever had regret at the end of the day because you were congruent?
never, never. But I don't think I've had a day ever in 33 years that I didn't have to battle some element of incongruency in some way.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Constant improvement, right?
Yep.
And this is great stuff, Matt. So next time, I promise we will go into the cycles because I do have some concepts within the cycles that I might think are incongruent that I would like to get your opinion on. Okay.
Yeah. Great. Great.
I'm all right. I'm excited, Matt. This has been great, folks. Dr. Matt Alvord, and we will be seeing him real soon, hopefully within the month. Would that be possible, Matt?
Sure. Yeah, I did that. Those Wednesdays at 1 work usually work pretty well for me.
Awesome. Well, we're going to keep it up then, folks. If you have any comments or questions, please drop them in the comments, and we'll be glad to include them on our next conversation. Dr. Matt, thank you very much as always. You keep rocking, brother.
Thanks, Mark. Have a great day.
You too, bro.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.